Do you know what this place is?
Your mother, Angela, she's our patient.
I've been out of touch with her for a very long time. Oh my God.
Her mind is very active in the simulation.
Simulation?
She went on a homicidal rampage. This is your chance to ask her why.
Mom?
Carly, you have to go. You have to go.
Guys, please let me out! Can you hear me? Guys!
What are we doing?
No. Just wait.
Welcome back to another episode of the SoundWorks Collection. I'm Michael Coleman. I am so excited to talk about Director Neill Blomkamp's new film, Demonic. Congratulations, you guys, on putting out a film in the middle of a pandemic. I feel like, Neil, when I found out about your project, it sounded like you were leaning in to, I don't know if it's the opportunity, but just the reality that we were going to be in lockdown for a fair amount of time. I mean, I'd love just to understand the little backstory of when this project presented itself and how you got into development and production for your film.
It was an unusual film because it was definitely a case of when the pandemic began, it put on pause a bigger and more traditional Hollywood film that I was working on. And I mean, the whole planet had sort of hit the brakes around March and April. And I think if it wasn't for the massive experiments of Oat Studios and being comfortable with just making stuff that we were self-financing and, you know, putting on YouTube, it probably wouldn't have happened because the idea was like, well, let's just grab some cameras and make another film, except this one will be feature length. So, and, you know, it was also inspired by the fact that I always loved Paranormal Activity and the Blair Witch Project in the way that those directors self-financed something and just went out and shot it. You know, I knew I always wanted to do that at some point. And so once COVID really had locked everything down and stopped things and it was unclear what was happening, it felt like a perfect opportunity to shoot something. And I'd also just moved to the area that the film is shot in, which is a more rural area of British Columbia. And I knew all of these locations that we would have access to. And, you know, it was kind of just assembling a movie out of the puzzle pieces that we had. So it's pretty unusual in that regard.
That's awesome. You know, for me, I remember when you released not a teaser, not even a trailer for District 9. It was kind of like was it a test clip? Like, what was it, like a proof of concept? What was it that you were doing?
So I made a short film called Alive in Joburg, which was when I made it, it was not designed to be a proof of concept for a bigger feature. It only turned into that when Halo collapsed, that it was like, let's make a film out of what this South African science fiction concept is.
Because I have seen how you kind of, creatively approach a project and how you kind of workshop it. And obviously you and, you know, your team and obviously now what Oats kind of represents the studio. I feel like you guys really like this sandbox of playing in, now we're playing in like a AR, VR, very interesting, you know, visual space. When you conceptualize this film, did it always live in, I guess, is it Unity or like what's the engine that's driving all of it?
It is Unity. Yeah, the you know, like what I was saying earlier about having a bunch of puzzle pieces that you're assembling the movie out of. One of them was the fact that I knew with my brother who you know, has this history of running Oats. Although I should be clear that this is not an Oats film, but it's made up of all of the same people. Like, Vince and Joe did all of the sound work for everything we did in Oats. And the Unity idea was this, came out of this project that we did called Adam, which was entirely real time. There was no live action component to it. And my brother and I, Mike, we always spoke about wanting to, at some point, use some sort of real time graphics in a longer, you know, feature film narrative and how that may work. And so when this Paranormal Activity approach of just going out and shooting something ourselves came up, I sort of resurrected that idea. And when you combine that with the concept of demonic possession and a lot of the horror tropes that are in the film, you kind of meet at this point where, you know, I guess it sort of is what demonic is. It's this idea of high tech and demonic possession. So it's a remnant of a piece of a project of Oates and wanting to at some point use it in a feature film. And I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that a low budget horror film is like 16 minutes of entirely CG content that was captured with a really unusual method called volumetric capture, which should probably become more and more prevalent in films as its resolution increases.
I love the aesthetic of what you're trying to. It's not trying to be realistic. We're not trying to paint a picture of, you know, a hyper-real environment. To me, it was like its own world. And I think I want to definitely talk about the sound of demonic. But I love, before we go in, Vince and Joe, for, you know, hanging around Neill for as long as you have. What have you learned from your collaboration? How do you describe the role of sound in Neill's film? And obviously, when you found out about demonic, what were your thoughts about going back in and working on another picture?
Loved it. Yeah, loved it. I mean, he's real. He gives you direction and then an open road, and that's what I like. I like, just like, you know, you have an idea and you run it by him, and he's like, "Well, try it and see where we go." So, and I like that. I like that it's an open road, and you just throw stuff at it till you like, we both go, "Yeah, that's it. We love it." So that's what I really like about it.
Even going back to ELYSIUM, I would do tons of different versions of robot voices and that kind of thing. But it was always going through the editor. So I'd send the editor a bunch of stuff, and then the editor would play it for Neill. And I think Chappie was the same way. But then when we started doing Oates, we were just really much more direct with Neill, and we just start sending QuickTimes. So even, you know, the pandemic hit, and for us in post, it really didn't change very much, because that's how we worked all through Oates. I don't think we ever got together once, did we, Neill, on Oates for a playback?
No, I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so.
And Joe and I would just, you know, do our own thing and then send stuff back and forth. And I think the final mixes were all done in my studio, and then, you know, send it off to Neill. So we'd send him QuickTimes and go, you know, okay, here's 3 different versions of this. Okay, number 1, but change such and such and such. Okay, give 3 different versions of that. And then you'd get to a point, okay, that's it. And the great thing about working with Neill was that was it. There was no down, oh, you know, I liked this 2 months ago, but I don't like, no. That's what he likes. That's what we got. So it worked really well. So the pandemic was a challenge with ADR and, you know, getting actors and that kind of thing with the other projects we're doing as well. But from a collaboration point of view, it was really the same as we've been doing for a couple of years now.
I mean, the thing that was hilarious was, Joe, do you remember when we had that party at Oates, and I didn't know what you looked like?
Yeah.
So like I didn't know it was Joe, because everything was always remote, and that was like completely pre-pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I think the you know, the prevalence of Zoom, and I mean, I don't remember because I have a terrible memory, but I'm pretty sure we started using Zoom when we were doing Demonic. So it's like, you know, I feel like I'm starting to like get to know them more visually. But Vince, somehow I knew visually more. Maybe it was like on ELYSIUM or something, or on Chappie, that we were running into one another. Yeah,
we're definitely more. And there was an ADR session in LA that we were together on for ELYSIUM, and so we were definitely more together on those projects. But this is way easier to communicate. That's the one positive side of the pandemic, is the whole Zoom, Skype kind of idea, being able to just instantly actually talk to people.
Yeah.
You know, something that I find so interesting is when films come out, people like to frame them up as saying it's a low budget film, it's a Hollywood blockbuster. And for some reason, money is a factor in terms of what you can or can't do. And in this case, in this film, okay, sure, maybe it's a low budget film because it's not the Avengers. Like anything that's not the Avengers is a low budget film in my mind. It just seems that it gets skewed that way. So for you, Neill, when you were trying to figure out, like you're saying, volumetric capture, to me, I think could be very often intimidating, maybe for a lot of people who don't have the experience. Obviously, you've had many years with your, like you said, with your work with your brother and Oates and everything else. Why did you want to take this approach, and what did it allow you in the sense of what you could do, like from production value standpoint?
Well, I mean, firstly, there would be no way to afford doing 15 or 16 minutes of all CG in a film at this budget level without it being highly unconventional in what the approach was. So a combination of a video game engine mixed with volumetric capture allowed that to happen. But I think it was uniquely written into the script in a way that we knew that is exactly what we were going to get. So if a substantially budgeted film attempted to use volumetric capture, the only way currently that they would be able to use it would be to bring all of its glitches and errors with it into the movie, right? It's not going to look photoreal. It's not going to look perfect yet. So it was sort of written around that idea, and so I don't really imagine a world in which we would have been able to do that unless we were at a budget level where you can experiment and kind of take unusual risks and choices. We weren't even completely sure what it was going to look like, because the volumetric capture examples that exist out in the world are usually created where the cameras that are filming the subject are incredibly close to them, and it's usually a single subject. So to get two subjects in the same scene, obviously your camera array moves further away from them, and resolution actually squares itself in how it drops off. It's an exponential drop off as it goes further out. So when you're in a 4 meter volume, which is what we shot in, a 4 by 4 meter, it was actually kind of a hemisphere. The resolution drop off is immense, but there's no other way to do it other than to break their performances up and shoot two separate things, which, the performance would suffer too much. So that's in this situation, that's what the low budget provided for was a place to play. And it's imagery that I haven't actually seen in a film before. Like, we have an orthoscopic shot of her walking through the house where the perspective is totally crushed, and it looks like The Sims, and it's like I just haven't seen that before, which is cool.
Yeah, I don't want to say, I mean, The Sims was kind of like what I was getting at too, like that very unique perspective that I think people know, but we haven't seen before. So for both Nolan and Maureen, for you guys, what to you is exciting? What does it allow you? And for, I mean, obviously Maureen, I feel like with the volumetric capture, it's almost like animation where you don't get production, you don't get anything for free. You kind of have to recreate that environment. What did you guys find were the creative challenges when we were starting to look at some of the volumetric capture of this film?
Yeah, we were working to picture that wasn't fully flushed out. So we were working for quite a while to the actual live action footage with all the cameras in the array. So that part was kind of difficult to know what the end product would be, right? So Joe did a lot of work in that. I kind of hopped on after the VFX had been finished and fully flushed out. So then Joe had me kind of just come back, and I did the pixelation, come up of everything in the background, and then Joe seeing everything else through. So I think Joe could probably touch base on a couple of those things a little better.
Well, in general, I'll say this to both, to all three of us, because when we started out, yeah, there's definitely it looks a certain way. With the vision of what it's going to be, you start progressing. But Neil, he always kills it at the end, because I'm always we're finished, and then I see the final product, and I'm like, yeah, we got to go back. we got to go finesse it, because it's just above what I was expecting.
I thought I was the one always doing that, throwing you guys curveballs with unlocking the edit or something.
No, it's just when you see the finish, it's you got something you're happy with, right? We did that whole sim sequence, and we were happy with it, and Maureen was, the direction with Maureen was, it's not real, sort of create something and use your imagination. So she would do, a bunch of different, Foley passes on surfaces, but affected. So it was a lot of experimenting because we didn't really know what the scene was gonna, end up being or sounding like. So there was a lot of experimenting. But again, even though we get to the place that we're so happy with, then we see his final, rendering, and trust me, even the last stage that we think we're right there, and then we finish, he gives us another little output, and I was like, there's stuff we haven't seen before. It just amplifies everything, and we're like, okay, we got to go back and tweak it because there's little things that we want to hit, and we wanted the sound to really elevate and be where that picture was, because the picture was so cool and just doing stuff that we're like, okay, we gotta add it or massage or change some things just to really to complement that picture. So
those sequences in the movie are my favorite pieces of sound design, where it's this and I remember going back and forward with Joe about this, where you'd have her walking up the stairs and we'd have the stairs creaking, and it's obviously in a simulation that wouldn't necessarily happen. And then you're also dealing with a horror film, and then you could also make the argument that in the simulation, it's possible that user that had built the house wanted some kind of creaking stairs in the sim that they live in. So, and there were hundreds of examples of that, like the sound of wildlife outside and birds, and everything had this slightly crushed down, sort of lower resolution bit rate to how it sounded, that it just makes you feel like you're living in that simulation. So I took a lot of pleasure in even just watching those scenes. I dig them.
Yeah, like one of my favorite, that I've probably done in my career was, it may seem something simple like the ambience of those sim scenes, but man, it was taxing in the sense of like trying to come up with something different, and B, that fit the environment, and just sounded really cool. So that was done in Atmos really, and down mixed into whatever permutation we needed. But like just picking the right ambiences, and we had it stuttering, and we had it, some stuff, birds going backwards, but that sounded like birds, but they're actually birds back, singing backwards, but it just still sounded like a bird. I like little stuff like that. But when you put it all together, like if you just listen to the environment, you're gonna go, that's crazy. That sounds so different. Like it's worldly. So that was really cool, because when you put that in with the sim, it just glued everything together. So I really love all the textured on the atmospheric stuff that we used on the sim stuff, because it just came to life.
Joe, I don't remember, because I was saying before I have a terrible memory, but I don't remember if we discussed this, but did we talk about wanting to create massive tonal differences between different scenes?
Yes.
I don't remember, because I know we got there, but I don't remember if I was actively saying that or not. Because,
you were, you were, and you love those, and one of the
Eraserhead, right? Did I reference
exactly.
Eraserhead? Yeah. So it's like a square wave where you go from one shot, sometimes a shot and definitely a scene, where it's two audioscapes that crash up against one another, and it's like massive variation between them.
Even within the scene, like we were doing that, even within like a scene, like even when she's in the I don't want to say the interrogation room, but where she was just debriefing, even those scenes where we're cutting close, cutting far, just the little changes in those the atmosphere, and that played really well. So yeah, we were doing that throughout the whole movie. This whole movie has that sort of huge texture field from beginning to end. You just feel it.
To go. You have to go. You have to go. You have to go. You have to stop it. Stop it. Stop doing that. You have to go. Guys, go. Daniel, please let me out. Michael, Daniel, can you hear me?
Come on, what are we doing?
No. Just wait.
Go!
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear, Neil, that you mentioned Eraserhead. I mean, to me, for David Fincher, that his sound guy Alan Splett, it's so serendipitous. You just mentioned I worked with his wife Ann Krober, and for me,
Lynch,
correct? Yeah, David Lynch. Lynch. For what I feel like what that's kind of hinting at and leaning into is what you can do sonically that you can't do visually, which is have things that are playing off sound or off screen, like you said, like winds or your atmosphere. And where did you start to kind of understand the power of building your atmospheres and not having to always visually represent it?
Well, I still think that I could do a lot more. Like, I mean, it's you could probably push that even further. Like what Joe's talking about with how those sometimes even within the same scene within shots, how it's varying like that. I think that audioscape can have sometimes more of an effect on the audience than the visuals can. Like if you just had a black screen with something that sounded like some sort of Arctic frozen seascape just howling, I think it taps into some part of the psyche that could create a response in the audience that may be greater than a silent visual of the same thing. So, but I think as time has gone on, films have become more and more generic in like the way the studios will not allow certain, crazy things to be done. And I think filmmakers become more and more okay with that. And I think the pinnacle of all of that is the audience at this point will probably reject something like Eraserhead if you put it out today. So, people always like, well, the studio's controlling stuff. It's like, well, actually, no, the film won't do well because people just want to watch Marvel movies. But I think if you're experimenting, you could definitely go further with that. I would love to go further with that. And I actually saw In the Earth by Ben Wheatley recently, which Vince and Joe, I don't know if you guys have seen that, but just for interest's sake, you should check it out because he does something really interesting where he actually he puts speakers in the woods in the movie, and they're using sonic acoustic, frequencies almost in the way that this horror film plays out. And so the audio and to some degree the visuals are embedded into the fabric of the movie. It's really interesting.
So Maureen, sometimes when we watch films, we take for granted that we hear every footstep, we know every fall. But in this case, when you see what Neil is trying to achieve, and we have no probably production to rely on, especially for the volumetric footage, what's exciting? I mean, I imagine you've seen everything throughout your career, you've worked on every type of scene, but then you get kind of presented with something like this. What's unique and different for you?
Well, my approach with this one was just to have fun and experiment. And so I would record straight and then we would play with the sound afterwards, or I would record multiple mics and one mic we would treat and the other one we wouldn't. So mostly I just
make it sound so simple. So, you don't give them that.
Years. It's years.
What have you found though in terms of once again, I'm going to say low budget, but what happens when we don't think about the Foley pass in a film? Like what is lost? Because to me, without the work that you're doing, I feel like there's an essence of the soundtrack that the director is going to want, that the rest of the sound team is going to want.
Right. Well, I think that it just gives a bit of life to the show. It brings it
realism.
It just brings it,
grounds
it.
Yeah.
And
it's the link up.
And
it's the link up.
And it can be the point of view as well. When she was walking up the stairs, it's her point of view. I treated the way the character I embodied was the feet of her walking up the stairs, not somebody walking up the street. It was the person I was trying to capture. It's sonically, right? So it just makes it feel a little bit more real.
What kind of stage are you recording it in? Like, where is the stage that you record?
It's in Victoria. I have a sound studio and a small stage within the studio where we do the recording. Engineers in a different part of the building. And
do you have all of your do you have like props everywhere that you can pull on to.
My props I store outside of my room because my room is a little bit on the small side. So and then I just run out of the room and I gather things, and I buy if I need, but I have 25 years worth of props collecting.
I'd love to look at that.
You're a professional
I'm
hoarder,
hoarder.
and it's totally it's totally justified. In this film, I went and I watched the trailer. You read the synopsis, but then it's like I just want to be a moviegoer and see what's to offer. And I'd love for you guys to break down this opening scene, because I'm not one. I mean, you mentioned like Blair Witch. I will go along for the ride. I will, be right there when it comes to horror films. I just found that what you guys are doing and how you're setting up this, the tone and the world, for Carly, to me is essential.
Carly. I'm here. Just a little further. I'm here. Mom. Oh, sweetheart. What are you doing? Don't you see what you're standing in?
So Neil, when you first maybe were writing this opening scene, maybe describe. I mean, there's accents on the doors, there's rustle of the trees, there's this tea kettle boiling. There's so much going on sonically. Like, is this all things that you're leaning into on the page?
I think writing the screenplay is very different from how you start approaching it from a directorial perspective. So I think writing it, you're only focusing really on character and story, because you know that you're going to switch that part of your brain into focusing on how to direct it and what that brings, like once you get to that phase. But what was always on the forefront of my mind the whole time, and I spoke to Joe about this tons, and I think maybe even the way that Vince approached some of the voice recording and the dialogue, I think may have even tied into this. But we always spoke about this notion of the way that films today use almost like too much sound design in the way that they try to create tension. And we spoke constantly about pulling everything back. So it would be that you'd only hear like dripping water. The scene that you're referring to, where she's looking for her mom, I presume, she's walking through the weeds and then she opens the door and she goes into the dark room. That scene is about restraint. So everything is pulled back. And if you hear anything, the audience hopefully is sort of leaning into it, trying to see or understand what she's looking at. And a lot of 21st century movies would be layered with tons and tons of sort of subsonic bass and stuff and things, and just it feels very full. So I think by pulling it back, it was an exercise in constant restraint, and also in trying to create this sense of tension and sort of brooding that was bubbling under the imagery. So that's the primary thing that I mean, I remember we had lots of discussions about that, like what is too much, what is too little, should we pull back more? And it always felt successful.
We had music at the beginning and we took it out.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, it was a perfect example.
Now there's only music at, I think, at the very tail end of the scene. There's a little bit of an accent going into her out of her, she wakes up. But other than that, there's no music.
No, and I'll jump in there too. And in the beginning of that opening scene, so there was music and even sound design. Like it was massive. It was like our first rendition that was just like this, woo, real Hollywood, just big, rah. And it was really massive. So then take out the music, but we still had a pretty deep layer of all this sound design we had going on. So even there, it was like, okay, this is close to this. Let's do this. This is not really, So we just really started to filter a whole bunch of stuff to where we ended up, at the final. So it was a lot of deliberate, I think would be the word to use. It's like if it's needed, if it's deliberately, that we can use it and it's doing an effect, then let's incorporate it. So that's how everything got really streamed down to where we'd hear it and the effect. It was really how did you feel once we heard it? So we take something out and like that's making me feel more eerie. That's great, perfect. That's what we'll keep. So.
The other scene like that is in the third act where they're walking down the concrete tunnel under the sanitarium and they get to where the priests have placed the mother, and that was also an example of overbearing music initially, and actually there's this awesome Latin voice recording of dialogue of like a real exorcism, which Vince and I went back and forward on until it got to this place of he has this like this feeling of it's just an ominous, scary, strange prayer that's being read, and so that as you get closer to it, that's what the audience is really being presented with, right? You're not presenting them with music or something else. It's like you're being pulled down the corridor by this strange voice. But I remember that scene was just another one where we just began to pare things back until eventually we ended up with just that. And it's funny because like I always try to err on the side of being, using realism to some degree, but that's 70s tape. What are those things called? It's like a tape, reel to reel. And I really wanted to make sure that there was some sort of like almost like digital like stuttering in it, which doesn't necessarily make sense, but it works though. It's like it's in there, and there's a little bit of crunchy human voice, even though it should be an analog recording.
When Carly first transitions into this, in the world, and we have the third person perspective, I love what you guys did sonically with the echo, with the voice, with the space. Can you just talk about leaning into? Did you guys mention that? So it was a Dolby Atmos mix, is that correct?
It was never released in Dolby Atmos.
No, yeah.
Both Joe and I were working in a template in Dolby Atmos, but it was never released in Atmos.
Yeah, like even a lot of, like I'll say, like the experience that everybody's gonna get is gonna be this experience, but like if you hear it in the in the 7.1 or 7.1.2, because that's the way we sort of started to do the whole texturing and the ambience in this whole big. A bigger landscape, if you will. So we want it to be specific to the speakers, really stuff that's really, interweaving in and out of of every speaker. And then when you pare it down, it starts to lose a bit of its effects. But the full effect, if it ever gets to an Atmos, we'll hear this texture and the ambience just incredible. So I hear it in my room that way. That's why. So I'm like, it's nuts. So.
I think a lot of times for films, with, condensed timelines and, deliverable date, looming, a lot of times we can't take the luxury of going out and re-recording new sounds or even thinking about, new textures. Nolan, for you, where did you start? Like when you guys were spotting the film, what things, obviously you said, we're not going to pull this from a library. We're not going to, try to just use a pre-existing sound. What were some of the sounds that you were looking for to go out and record?
Well, Joe is really good in that he just kind of said, this is your area that you're going to work in, which was just basically all hard effects for the first passes when we were working with like the not so locked cut. So it was just hitting all those doors, all the obvious things. And then the teapot boiling happens a couple times throughout the film. So I knew I wanted to like record something for that because I didn't want to just go pull from Sound Idea 6000, So I recorded my teapot and I threw a hydrophone on there so that it had like a thicker, low texture that I could blend in there, which is kind of cool. And I recorded the switch on it, like with a bunch of different mics and different perspectives, because I wanted that like thunk when it finishes steaming and that's that off. I wanted that to sound cool. And then there's like a couple just really brief moments that I overly recorded for. There's just one shot in the kitchen when, in the establishing bit of the restaurant and the coffee shop, she's just like washing dishes in the sink. Like that's a sound that
which we ended up cutting.
Did you?
Oh no, because I love that shot so much. But it was I didn't like the whole coffee shop scene, but I loved that shot, and there was no way to keep just that shot.
It's a well, aside from that, and then I recorded a bunch of different lamps and switches to try to get something nice for her, like bedside lamp. I had a really old recording that within a shipping container that I never like went through and cleaned up and prepped for my library. So I kind of took this opportunity of this movie to like dive back into those recordings and master them and get them all cleaned up. And there's some like gems in that recording session that really made that.
And we used we used quite a bit of that, like affected and textured, and threw it in on those scenes.
Yeah, there's like a hard cut to the shipping container's doors like opening, which I think sounds really cool. So you guys did a great job with the mix and getting that all prepped. I also recorded a windstorm like a long time ago that I put in some wind chimes from. There's this house like close to me that was kind of a hippie-ish like house and lady. So she had a bunch of like trinkets like hanging from her deck. So I recorded all that like moving in the wind, and I think that made it into Carly's friend's like house.
I love it.
Yeah.
Something I find sometimes is there might be sound motifs that a director likes to lean into. Vince, if you could describe Neill's sound palette or style, what are things that you guys return to when it comes to Neill's film?
Especially on the Oates stuff, there were so many different styles of things. To the one where it was all CG. The name got changed so many times that I don't. No, not Adam. Before Adam, in part of.
Oh, like Pretoria.
Could be called. I'm trying to remember
There's so
the
many.
name.
Was it which? What was the imagery?
The big concept? Robot guy walking down,
pacing around with his sword.
Yeah.
No, that's Pretoria.
Pretoria. Okay. That was like total CG, and the voices were all affected, and then you go from that to the one that Charlton did where he was God. I think the series was called God, and those were like completely different because you're looking at a mini world, and one's the African plains and one's something else.
And the puppets.
The puppets aren't released yet.
They're not released yet.
Chuckaroo's not out yet. No, you can talk about it, Maureen, but it's like it just the audience just won't know.
I loved it.
Chuckaroo is one of my favorites for sure.
Yeah.
So there is no real style or thing that Neill goes to except what's called for in the film. Really?
Yeah.
I feel like there is one thing that I do often that I find myself doing like way too much, which is, and I mean, this is more prevalent in ELYSIUM and District 9, and then to a lesser degree, it's in Adam as well, which is overhead, like computer voices that are speaking to characters in the movie. Like I always do that.
We did that in Chappie a bit too.
Yeah, no, it's like constant. I can't stop myself.
Like just chatter.
Yeah.
It would be some sort of pre-recorded overhead voice, like in Adam when all of the droids need refuge and they've been walking through the desert. They go into this like airdroppable sort of military shelter that's 100 years old, and they seek refuge. And when they're walking up the stairs going in, there's this pre-recorded Chinese language voice that's telling them what to do. Right?
Yeah,
and
that sounds so
from
cool.
The war. It does. No, I agree. It sounds amazing.
No, the cool thing there too is they all have a different flavor. Like it's not like you're stuck to a certain sound of it. It's like they all got a different texture or flavor to it. So that's what I like about it.
Elysium
it's sound this way.
Elysium was the extreme where we would have 4 or 5 different actors do a voice and then pick between. I mean, I don't know how many actors I went through for all the computer voices and the overhead voices and there were so many different voices playing in the background, and it just added this wonderful texture to the film.
This is a really out there question, Neill. Are you a video gamer? Do you play many video games?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I don't think I play
too many
video games, but I do play video games.
This is not an intervention. The reason why I ask is I feel like that's something that's reminiscent of video games when we have like a non-linear, non-scripted environment where like we need stuff. If the player just stands still, we're going to hear the world around them. And I feel like that's kind of the sense I get is that you're leaning into like, it's a world that we're kind of living in, and it's not scripted and it's not pre-programmed. It's just live. It's living.
Yeah, I mean, you could be right. You could be right. Like sort of a GTA 5 open world kind of situation. Yeah, I mean, that could be true. I think, for me, I feel like it does come from science fiction that I saw when I was a kid, I think. And it's hard to think of exactly which films I'm referencing, but...
I think Blade Runner's done that. I feel like in a sense, maybe the original.
No, lots of them have done it. Okay. I'm just trying to think which one was the one that really had an effect on me. Yeah, it's like the classic sort of, disassociated voice that's giving you some sort of nuclear countdown. It's like that. It's that trope.
I found that sometimes, in David Fincher's films, I think the backgrounds are just as interesting as what's going on sometimes. And I think this is the case with Demonic too, is what you guys are doing in your atmospheres and your backgrounds. It's not wind, it's a presence, because there is a presence in this, as a character. So, I feel like it's, obviously it shows up in the writing, it shows up in the soundtrack. And I feel like, when I was asking you, Vince, like, is there something you return? Is there a return? I feel like maybe it is the backgrounds. You are thinking about the world and not just what the camera is presenting.
Yeah, there's also, I'm always in the dialogue. I'm trying to make it interesting. Like even the CG scenes you were talking about, I think I have it here where she's walking down the first CG scene. And I just got this delay with a flanger with the spinning around in Atmos or 7.1. It's great, but even in stereo, it kind of translates and then once everything else is in there, you don't really hear the delay, but you feel this weirdness of it. And just trying to step it out of just the normal.
And it also grounds the audience with, even though they're in a simulation, there's these extremely organic, human, breathy, this feeling of organics that's happening inside of a sim that I think is good for the audience.
3, 2, 1. Okay, looking good. And she's dropping in.
For this character, the creature of the demon, did you guys always establish the visual aesthetic of what that was going to look and feel like, or what was the evolution of this? Because I feel like when we do reveal it sonically, it's pretty astonishing, like what's going on.
I mean, for me, it was conceived of as some sort of raven crow, bipedal anthropomorphic thing from day one. People have asked me in other interviews like where that comes from. I have like no idea, but it was just written that way, and it just stuck. And then a concept artist that I work with a lot did one illustration of it and just hit it out of the park, and it was exactly what is in the movie. But I agree, the sound is super cool, and it has this like bird-like shrill that's sort of terrifying. How did you guys do that?
So that creature was really fun, and when I first saw it, I instantly like fell in love with it. So it's like, okay, I'm all in. so it started experimenting with different sounds for that, but definitely wanted it to be shrieky and, scary and annoying and all that sort of stuff. But in today's plugins or today's software, I mean, we're, there's so much you can do, and it's so much fun. So like in this situation, like you can build a profile, which is what I did. So you can build a vocal profile of what you want the creature to sort of sound like or mimic, or how the attack is and the release. So now you have this profile. Now you can attach or start to create and layer sounds within to build that profile. So that's how it started. But then now you can take it a step further, and like with plugins like NV and I think Transformers got it, or Reformers, like you can add elements within it, and because you still have the base profile of that sound. Like in this case, we have the base sound that we've created, which is the shrieking creature. But to that, there's elements of ice cracking. There is a high-pitched metal, what do you call it? Just shrieking. And then there's also some slimy, gurgling goo. But now you can all layer that and mix that into the profile that you've created. And it's just great. Like you can just change something and give it texture and just, it's not one dimensional anymore.
Joe, did we talk about cracking ice when we were talking about the creature?
No.
Did we ever bring that up?
No.
Because what's so weird about that is that was my reference for Ola for music.
Oh, wow.
I sent him sort of these fjords that were breaking and cracking as the basis to just kind of like start working on the soundtrack.
Yeah, no,
So
I just threw that in because I liked the way it was interacting with the bass creature voice and all the crackling aspects of it. And when I put it in the profile, it was just enhancing certain things or accenting certain things, and I'm like, love it. And then the slimy goo was sort of the something I was holding it together at the bottom end, and the shrieking metal was just pointing some high accents to it. So it's just all together, it's just really cool sound. But again, that's what I love about today, is like you can really start to get in and really manipulate a lot of stuff with profiling, and I love that. I love the fact that you can even create something with your own mouth and totally retransform it into something else because you just based it. You create a profile that you want to use. So love that today.
The other place that has really interesting, like a sort of mosaic of different sounds layered on top of one another is when she actually becomes possessed. And you have all of the swirling voices around her. I really like the way that came together too.
Maureen, I find that like sometimes with sound, editorial and whatnot, they're going to cover everything, and then Foley can come in maybe before or after and accent certain moments. What did you find you wanted to provide when it came to this demon? Because I feel like with a feathered creature, it's like that to me seems like a performance opportunity that only Foley should be kind of representing. What was your approach?
Well, I tried to just break down what it was and give it mass and give it. I kept thinking of when you open up a bird wing, it's got the spiny sort of, and that's the sound I was trying to get, that kind of sound. That's what really stuck in my head. So that was the approach I was looking for. It's the direction I went and just tried to get it any way I could. Whether they used it or not, I don't know. Probably not.
Did.
Always gets turned off.
We used it. No, the other thing too to keep in mind, like, so just the way this team worked, just so you get a sense of it, is whenever we created something like Maureen was working on the creature, and if I was already like mid stride in something I liked, like the shrieking sound, like maybe it wasn't finished totally, but I already had like a base of what I wanted. So I would dump that, create a mix of that, send it to Maureen, send it to Vince. So now in their templates, they already have sort of where I'm at. So now they can, sort of work around it or sweeten stuff. So Vince can start to move voices around to what I'm doing. Maureen knows what Hardfex is like going to be covering and sort of the direction I'm going in. So now she doesn't have to do the same thing. Like she's like, okay, he's got this, and now she's creating something else, and that's why it works. So it's like we're not overlapping sounds or doing stuff that's generically the same. So she's like, he's covering that. I send it to Nolan, same thing. He'd hear what I was doing, and now he'd complement it with something else. Like the structure that this was, it was all like that. Every time there was an update in 2 weeks, I did, we refined it. Okay, send another mix out to these guys. So they always had a lay of the land of where we were. And so was Vince. Vince was doing the same thing. If he was creating something, send it to me so I know where he was and where I didn't want to overlap or get in the way of.
For the creature demon, Joe had sent me, this was quite far down the line when we were getting really close with it. Joe had it super flushed out, and he just wanted some guttural things happening in between the real big shrieks. So he sent me his down mix, and then I just added some little guttural breathy bits in between the shrieks. I don't know if where it ended in the mix, but
I love just the idea, everyone throwing their ideas into the pot, leaving it to kind of what best serves the picture, and ultimately, what's going to support the story. I think lastly, just to close out this conversation, Neil, what do you learn from returning to a smaller scale, a more an approach where I feel like you don't need to appease anyone. You're really just appeasing the story and really taking care of what, the inspiration was for doing this project. Yeah. What do you enjoy about being a little more nimble in the sense of what you guys were doing with Demonic?
I mean, to be honest, it didn't really feel that different to me in the sense that I think maybe as I've gotten older, I have more of an eye for thinking about what the audience is feeling. Chappie's an example of where I didn't give two shits what the audience thought, and that's not necessarily the best thing.
Well, when you say that, you mean in the sense of you're doing something because you're satisfying your own needs initially.
Yeah, being a filmmaker is a very strange thing. It's well, who are you making films for? What are you doing? Artwork in general. What are you doing? Are you making for yourself? Are you making for other people? It's a very deep, weird, psychological question. And I find myself thinking about where the audience is in the story and in the film more lately. So whether it's $100 million film or a $1 million film, I don't really see that changing that much. I think you can try to be experimental and unusual as long as you don't confuse the audience or leave them sort of, lying in the background. But I think the process for me was it felt very creative. Maybe because of the fact that it was lower budget and we didn't have too many people breathing down our necks, So it felt cool to me. I think it was a lot of pressure for everyone, including me, because we were trying to do something that effectively looked and felt and sounded much bigger than it financially was, so that creates pressure. But yeah, overall it was a really good process. It was a creative process with a result that I feel proud of.
Yeah, it's always really interesting. We don't have the perspective of a project until it's behind us in a way that, reviews aside, like you say, I'm not doing this for I don't really care what people think. I'm doing this project because as an artist, I am need to challenge myself and do things that I haven't done before.
I think. I care less about reviews than I do about the audience. Imagine watching the movie in a theater with an audience, right? And it's are they getting what they feel is their money's worth for driving to a movie theater and sitting down and watching something? And I think that's a really good barometer to sort of measure what you're doing up against. So because you are making it for the audience ultimately. Reviews are a lot less interesting.
You know, I think you guys showed that you can continue to put out really exciting, new, interesting stories, and especially with the volumetric aspect, I don't think we've ever seen anything quite like it. And that's why I'm saying, I think once we have the perspective in a few years from now, I think we'll look back and be like, that was really cool. I can't believe we had the chance to do that, because maybe otherwise we wouldn't have had the opportunity to tell a story like Demonic. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be pretty fascinating to see where volumetric capture goes. I mean, once the resolution, if you get to the point that individual hair strands are visible in 3D, I don't see traditional cameras really hanging on for that much longer at that point, because you just have a 3-dimensional movie, you know, and you can choose everything later.
I hate it when James Cameron is somewhat right about maybe like what Avatar was trying to address.
Well, I mean, Avatar is a perfect example, right? Like you, in the case of Avatar, you're building sets with actors that are in hair and makeup, and then you're shooting them with traditional cameras. Even though they're stereoscopic cameras, it's completely traditional, and you're locked into what you shot. And then he's going to drop those characters into a 3D environment on Pandora, and your Pandora environment has to be tracked to the live action cameras you shot 6 months ago. You can't deviate from that. But if he'd done volume capture on those actors, you would take them like video game characters and drop them into Pandora and do whatever you want. Lighting, camera position, you know, everything.
I'm so appreciative that we could be here with the sound team. We could go on for days. I feel like the space visually is incredibly exciting, and sonically, obviously, with immersive audio and what the promise of that, I feel like, you know, there's so much more to do, you know, when it comes to filmmaking. And so I'm so excited just to have the opportunity to talk with this team. I feel like whether, you know, people see it in the theater or at home, definitely check it out. Excited that IFC Midnight has picked this up, and they're going to be, you know, presenting it. It looks like August 20th. So for folks who are excited to get back to the theater as I am, please check out this film. You know, lastly, who else are we forgetting? I mean, I'm looking at the IMDb credits. I feel like this might be majority of the team, but who else is working behind the scenes? Who else is helping out that you guys want to acknowledge?
Jordan Tsai, production sound mixer. He's a good friend of mine actually as well. So he captured all the voices on set.
Dave Hibbert, who recorded the Foley.
That's it. We're super tight, tiny team.
Yeah, it was a tight team.
So good. Well, thank you guys so much. Super exciting. Neill, it's such a pleasure to have a chance to talk with you. I just feel like I've been such a fan of your work and your storytelling process. What you did here, I think, was really interesting and exciting, and I can't wait to see what's next from you guys and this team. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, man. It was awesome being on.
Thanks, Michael.